Thank you for the introduction, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you to the audience for coming. So the title of our presentation is Digital Attacks Against Exile and Diaspora Women Activists and What to Do About Them. So I'll briefly introduce my colleagues here who will be talking about their experiences researching digital transnational repression and experiencing it. And before we get to the panel discussion, I will give you a brief introduction to what is transnational repression, what is digital transnational repression, and we even have a video, which is hopefully welcome news. It's short, but it gives you a very concise primer to what we're talking about today. So I'm Sienna, a senior legal advisor at the Citizen Lab, and I'm joined here by my colleague Gözde Burcu. She is a Turkish-German writer and academic. She's currently a doctoral research fellow at the Citizen Lab at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and that's how we know each other, and a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto. Thank you. I am also joined here by Arzu Gebula. Arzu is an Azerbaijani columnist and writer with a special focus on digital authoritarianism and its implications on human rights and press freedom. In 2019, Arzu launched Azerbaijan Internet Watch, a platform that documents, monitors digital information, controls, and its impact on civil society in Azerbaijan. And I've been working with Arzu on digital transnational repression, I guess, over this past year and a little bit more. More applause. And last but not least is Maryam Mirza, who's a journalist and researcher originally from Iran for 13 years until, I guess, last year, 2023. She worked with Deutsche Welle, and since leaving, she has held a research fellowship on gender-based digital transnational repression, which I'll talk a little bit about today, our research program, and served as a head of Iran programs at Net Freedom Pioneers. Wonderful. So I'm going to juggle a PowerPoint and being moderator all at the same time. We'll see how this goes. So before we begin, the Citizen Lab has been doing research on transnational repression, specifically digital transnational repression, for a few years now. And for those of you who do not know us, we're a research lab at the Monk School at the University of Toronto. And our research essentially is anything at the intersection of human rights and digital technologies, which obviously digital transnational repression is very much at that intersection. So before we begin, what is transnational repression, digital transnational repression? Had this presentation been 2 years ago, I think everyone would say, what are you talking about? But over the past 2 years, I think we're increasingly seeing this word transnational repression in popular media, not just in academic publications. So it might be something that you're already familiar with, but I'll give you a brief overview. So transnational repression describes when governments act to silence, harass, or intimidate dissidents and activists, usually nationals or ex-nationals of that country who are living abroad. So it can take many different forms. Some of them are particularly gruesome. For example, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi is one example. We also see a variety of other methods. For example, coercion by proxy describes when a state, instead of going directly after a dissident in exile, goes after the family of that person who is still within the borders of the state in order to silence their work from abroad. We do think this appears to be increasingly normalized and widespread as a practice, and if host states fail to respond, I think transnational repression will just continue to proliferate and is increasingly one of the many tools in the authoritarian toolkit. So digital transnational repression is a focus of our work, and it's not very complicated. It essentially means transnational repression that's being undertaken through digital technologies. So it can be a range of different techniques. On the minority scale would be spyware, where a country, for example, one example is Omar Abdulaziz, a Canadian Saudi dissident who was targeted by the Saudi regime, where his phone was infected with spyware. So that's one example. But I think more common, which will be the discussion of today, is really harmful and horrible online harassment and disinformation campaigns that ruin people's lives and make it impossible to do their work, and that have serious psychological and social impacts on them. So that I think is the bread and butter of authoritarian regime approaches to digital transnational repression. So instead of me talking for 5 minutes, we have a brief video that provides an introduction to what we're going to talk about today. And then I'll talk a little bit about our research program, and then we'll open it up for discussion among everyone here, which I think will be the best part of this presentation.
It has never been safe to be an activist or political dissident. You could be subject to harassment, intimidation, imprisonment, physical assault, or even murder. In the past, escaping your country of origin was an important step towards finding safety. But with the expansion of tools available to authoritarian governments, activists can now be affected by what's known as digital transnational repression. These tools allow governments to reach beyond borders and gain access to activists' social media and email accounts through surveillance and hacking attempts. In speaking with dissidents who have relocated to Canada, it's clear that digital transnational repression is having a serious impact on the advocacy work, sense of security, and emotional welfare of these communities. But there is little support for victims who experience such targeting, and policy efforts to date have been insufficient. For diaspora communities, digital tools are often the only means of staying in contact with loved ones back home.
Activists have been forced to move all around the world. We don't have the luxury of direct and physical communication.
At a certain point, you need to differentiate between your political life and your personal relationships. Unfortunately, I know it's wrong, but I use the same platforms for both my personal and political life.
Technology is critical for transnational advocacy work, and it keeps exiled activists connected to fellow activists in their home country. But using these technologies leaves many vulnerable to digital attacks, and this leads to increased feelings of panic and uncertainty, with some questioning every aspect of their lives.
It has created in me permanent paranoia and constant anxiety about violating my privacy and using it against me. This affected my emotional relationships as well and created a state of psychological instability.
I don't usually feel as free as I used to be to connect with any public Wi-Fi. I don't sit in coffee shops anymore because I have to be connected to the internet, and the only internet that I would trust, my internet, here at home.
Women are particularly vulnerable to digital transnational repression. While online attacks like rape threats, forged intimate photos, and death threats are dangerous on their own, these can often culminate in physical aggressions.
I had one individual actually write me a whole poem that was over a page long on my Instagram that talked about how he was going to rape me.
I was walking my dog, and as I crossed the street, a man started chasing me all the way to my apartment building. I locked the door behind me, but he started banging on it and screaming. I called the police, and they said there is nothing they could do about it.
While the threats of digital transnational repression are very real and only likely to increase, activists have few places to turn to for help.
There's no 1-800 number to complain about digital repression, as far as I know.
Governments, including Canada, must commit to holding the perpetrators of digital transnational repression accountable, supporting the victims of these attacks, and engaging with the platforms and private companies that facilitate digital transnational repression.
Hopefully that introductory video, I'm not sure if the audio was great, but if you heard it, that's good. Hopefully that introductory video provides a bit of context for today's panel discussion. And one last comment before we start. So this video relates to work that we started a few years ago where we interviewed dissidents and other individuals in the diaspora and exile who were living in Canada regarding how they were experiencing digital transnational repression. After publishing that report, we decided to follow up and focus specifically on how women, dissidents, and activists in exile in the diaspora were experiencing digital transnational repression. And that's the purpose of today's discussion, is to talk with everyone here who has been conducting those interviews and may have experienced this type of of harm as well, to share their experiences and provide more insight into the gender dimensions of this practice. So, we'll be having a panel discussion among everyone. I think I'll ask everyone the same question, starting with you, Gozde, and then you, Arzu, and then you, Miriam. But in the order of keeping it fluid, if you feel like jumping in, perhaps we can do that as well. And at the end, there will be an opportunity for audience questions if we don't take too long in this part. So to start off this discussion, Gozde, I'm really curious, how has digital transnational repression impacted you personally, and sort of how has it been to work on this topic?
Thank you, Sienna. So just to briefly remind you that I have been working on a Turkish case, and I've been working on Turkey's efforts to coerce and harass dissidents abroad over 10 years now. And I've been looking at this topic from a research perspective, but also from a practitioner's perspective and an activist as well. And what I've really seen in the Turkish context is that you can't necessarily differentiate between domestic authoritarianism, what happens in the country, and what happens outside of the country. So over the last 15 years, the Erdogan regime has extended its web of silencing dissidents further and further. And that has not only affected academics, journalists, but also and especially activists in exile. And in my own work, in the beginning, it was like I was looking at it from an insider perspective, because I was also, or I am also Turkish-German, but at the same time, I was pretty much removed from the danger, right? I was in Canada, pretty secure, and most of what was happening, in my opinion at that point, happened in Germany, in Europe, where Erdogan's reach was, much more intense. But over time, I noticed that, the second one goes public, or one engages research in public settings, like at that time Twitter, Facebook, etc., you also become the target. And that's when I started to feel, the grip of the regime. And I also noticed that most of it, in the end, was digital, because that's how the regime could reach me at that point. So the further you're away, the more important digital channels become. And that really occurred to me. And when I started doing my work at the lab, I noticed, okay, this is really something that happens quite often. And if it happens to me, and I'm just a researcher, I'm not famous, then probably it'll happen to other people who are much louder than I am. And I think that was a wake-up call for me. In terms of being attacked digitally by authoritarian regimes, I have to say that what I experienced from the Turkish state was quite low intensity. So it was just, a few messages calling me a whore, slut. I don't know if you can use these words, but I'm using them. But I deleted those messages and I didn't think much about it. The biggest attacks that occurred were, in fact, in last October, and I think they were perpetrated by another state I was researching and working on. And those really messed with my psychology. Like, I was receiving messages, emails, one after another, threatening to kill me, rape me, cut my throat open, etc. So I guess the deeper you go into this work, the more you see, what it does to you. And since the motto of this panel is also, who cares, and mental health, I think that's something that we should talk a little bit more about during the later questions as well.
Thank you, Gozde. And over to you, Arzu.
Yeah, I share the experience of the types of attacks, adding a few death threats here and there, some nasty, quite an extensive collection of nasty comments and messages. But I actually want to talk about how it changed my thinking in general. My personal experience, so I'm originally from Azerbaijan, I'm based in Istanbul, I live in exile, and I was researching cases from Azerbaijan. And my own experience sort of shaped the way I became a cynic. So thank you, digital transnational repression, for sucking all of the positivity out of me and making me a grand cynic of this world. But really, in the very beginning, when I started writing 15 years ago, I thought, okay, if I talk about injustice, if I document the injustice, the extent of the injustice, if I bring enough evidence and talk to enough advocates and raise the issues on international platforms, that I will have an impact at least in one way or another. But gradually I realized that all it comes to at this point is just documentation and monitoring, because we need these stories, we need these cases, we need these experiences, first of all, to help us understand the many ways within which governments use this type of repression to go after critics, and specifically women, but also to develop ways to react, not prevent, specifically not prevent, because I've been working for so many years on this issue with various stakeholders, with international organizations that try to develop manuals, with digital security experts who try to develop specific training manuals for this. I work with platforms, or at least tried to, explain to them how terrible what they're not doing is. And I've realized that there is no solution. And for me, the impact this has had on me was not only becoming a cynic, but also realizing that the work that we're doing, this documentation, this research, especially when you factor in your own experience, it turns you into this case study, even for yourself. A case study that then helps you to reach out to others, or have others reach out to you who have had similar experiences, and basically help them navigate, because it's really terrible. I remember years ago when I was interviewed for a documentary film, I was asked, how does it feel like? What does it feel like? And I said, it's a dark place, because you don't know how you're supposed to respond to a death threat when it comes your way. You don't know how to respond to, 1,000 messages that you wake up to in your Instagram inbox just because, you have a certain opinion. And it's a dark place, but again, our stories, our work, our research, I feel are a way to encourage others not to be discouraged by these experiences, and also help us to develop more in-depth research, and perhaps at some point down the line, if we ever see that timeline happen in our lifetime, see significant change.
Thank you, Arzu. I do think one of the interesting things coming from this research has been this, the people we've spoken to no longer feel necessarily so alone, I guess, is one observation I've seen. So I think that's a positive. Even if we're just documenting, because it's hard to move beyond documentation, I think that's a positive outcome. Miriam.
I'm from Iran. I used to be a journalist inside Iran, and since 15 years ago that I have left Iran, I have worked as a journalist and a researcher, and also always I have been part of civil society for capacity building, for empowering other activists and civil society of Iran. In terms of attacks against myself, I have been targeted, of course, with a mix of impersonation, phishing, hacking attacks. But luckily, I have been always taking care or paying attention to inconsistencies, like why the name of this person who is claiming that he is or she's from a human rights organization is being written differently in every message he's sending me. Why he's using Gmail instead of the email address of the organization. But this is not the case for every activist, and this was something that I got to know through my interviews for this research, that especially in the context of widespread silence around these attacks, it's very easy to fall into the traps. And the silence has some reasons. I think one of the main important reasons of activists being silent about being attacked, or organizations even being silent about that their members or their organization being being impersonated or being attacked, is because they are very careful, or they are very scared of losing their connections, of being perceived as unsafe or as compromised. So instead of going out and saying loudly that, someone from like sending message to the members of our organization, claiming that they are from this or that organization, or they are there to interview our members. So be careful, everyone. And they keep silent. And this means that the others are in danger too. Among my interviewees, there was an activist who said that she was invited, an Iranian activist, she was invited to a conference, and I think in Germany, and then she was, while she was still there in Frankfurt, I think, she was a target of digital attacks. And then she wrote to the hosting organization of the conference that, just be careful, I was attacked, and I'm sure that it was related to my talk and the conference and everything. And the hosting organization sent her a message that we are aware of the attacks, and it is going on against other speakers too of our conference, but we prefer not to announce it publicly. So just in this case, like, they let others to be victims because they didn't want to say, okay, we had this conference and all the speakers become targets for digital attacks. Or activists themselves, they are very afraid that even their close friends would be so scared to hang out with them if they know that if they publish a photo with this or that activist, and then they will become also a target or being watched, so they would rethink about their friendship even. So there are different reasons, but what we can say is there is a silence, at least I can say, about digital attacks against Iranian activists and journalists. There is silence. And one of the things I was very happy to be part of this research was, more than anything else, was breaking the silence. Just saying that, okay, this problem is not normal. It's not normal if you are an activist. Harassment must not be the part of your package. It's not like normal that because you are an activist, you should be called whore or I don't know, whatever. And to tell that it is happening.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your very insightful comments. And I think, Miriam, in your comments just now, you really highlighted some of the really tangible impacts that digital transnational oppression has on targets. So social isolation, for example, self-censoring. There's a big, I don't know if transaction cost is the wrong word, but it makes transnational advocacy work extremely costly in time and in resources in a way that it wouldn't be if this practice didn't happen. So this recent research project is really on the experiences of women. So I'm curious, Gözde, if there's anything you can add to sort of what Miriam had just said about the impacts of digital transnational oppression. What did the women who you spoke to say in terms of the impacts it had on them and their experiences?
So basically, what I saw in my research on Turkey's diasporas, and when I talked to women in Turkey's diasporas, was that two patterns emerged in terms of their experiences. So one is very much tied to the key pillar of the Erdogan regime, which is, of course, the conservative Islamist ideology, which is inherently designed after patriarchal society, and it's misogynist, and women domestically in Turkey are, or have been over the last 10 years, sort of pushed at the margins of society. In politics, in media, I mean, you still see, media anchor women, you still see female politicians, but harassment and violence against them has been increasing. So one of the key patterns that I've seen was that many of the women who experienced harassment online reported that, you know, the attacks that we're experiencing were often going against their like facial appearances, what they were wearing, and sort of talking about their visible attributes rather than the content of their comments. And of course, like, be opposing to the state was the main reason why they were attacked. But the way they were attacked was very much filtered through of what it is to be a woman and why it is wrong to be a woman. And I think especially the fact that most people in opposition, from the secular opposition, the Republicans, or Kurdish and leftist activists, the one key pillar is that they prefer a different kind of lifestyle, and that's of course always the reason then they get attacked, and also sort of structures the content of their attack. But the other key component that probably hurt me most as someone from Turkey who is, you know, I don't belong to a minority in Turkey. The only identifier that could make me an enemy of the state is that I believe in democracy and I live a secular lifestyle. But there are also other minorities in Turkey like Kurds, Greeks, Assyrians, Christians, Alevis, etc. And these women carry a double burden, and they were very much dealing with not only you know, the general ways the regime was attacking women, like because of being a woman, but it was paired and intersected with their ethnic and religious identity. And that makes it really, and I really like in these interviews, I still get goosebumps when I talk about these interviews. It really shook me to the core when I listened to their stories, where one Kurdish activist, she was just 19 years old, posting about, you know, Kurdish language, culture, and the Kurdish regions, and trying to do some educational work out there in the diaspora in Germany, had to deal with comments comparing her to the PKK fighters, and you know, being and getting sent pictures of yellow bags with the bodies of those fighters, and saying, "We will kill you, and you will die in these bags." So, how do we deal with this? We're in the middle of Germany. She's a German citizen, and she's being subjected to this kind of violence, and she has nowhere to go to. And I think that really, the loneliness and the silence and just the mere like inability to act, not being able to go to the police, not knowing how to go to the police, I think is really the biggest problem. And the issue with host state authorities, security forces, is also that, you know, like the Kurdish opposition here in Germany also experiences repression from German police also. So for her, going to the police was also, you know, going to the German police even was a big burden. So where do these people go to, and how can we help them? And I think that's something we will talk more in the upcoming questions as well. But that really, you know, shook me.
Thank you, Gözde. And after we further discuss the impacts, we'll talk a little bit about specific responses that we expect of states and social media platforms and other actors in the transnational repression ecosystem. But before we get to that, Arzu, Mariam, would you like to add some comments?
Yeah, so in the case of the women I interviewed from Azerbaijan who ended up living in exile, the specifics of the work was slightly different to the case studies from Turkey. A lot of these women were involved in some form of rights-based work, or they were journalists, or they were working for within like advocacy networks, trying to raise awareness on what's happening in Azerbaijan. So they were very visible in their presence, even abroad. Not all, but majority of them were. And so, you know, the targeting aimed at them really kind of, the goal was to tarnish their reputation, of course, at home, and to silence them. Make them feel insecure, make them feel irrelevant, make them feel weak. And almost all of the women I spoke with, they share this psychological impact, this mental toll that the digital transnational repression had on them. Some even had very visible physical consequences. Some of the women I spoke with told me that they developed body tremors. Some women I spoke with told me that they had nightmares. Some women told me that they were paranoid. Some of them had children or a child, and they were very concerned of the safety of their child as well, just because it's not just happening online. You know, whatever you're exposed to also has its physical consequence. And if you have family, if you have children, of course that has a significant impact on that. One of the women I spoke with, actually, her husband was physically attacked in a third country where they've relocated. They were able to, of course, follow up with the police and find the men who attacked them. But those were just some of the impacts that they shared with me in their experiences. And I think what really spoke to me, or really kind of moved me as I was talking to them, was how they, despite all of this, still kept doing the work that they were doing, precisely because it's their main source of income as well. They're journalists, or they're rights defenders, or they're activists, or they're doing all this work because it's also part of their livelihood. And without even knowing what's out there, without even knowing who can help kind of like develop their internal defense mechanism. And we talked a lot about how our individual experiences helped us develop our own defense mechanisms, and I thought that was always the most moving part of the interview, because I shared my experience, and some of them actually knew who I was and the kind of work I did, and my own experience with digital transnational repression and online harassment. And so, yeah, we exchanged these anecdotes of coping mechanism. But yeah.
Thank you, and Miriam.
In the Farsi-speaking world of social media, I can say very widespread now is the defamation campaigns against activists. And I used to think that who believes that? Like, they would accuse a well-known activist of being financially supported by a terrorist group, and I would say, who believes that? And then when I interviewed activists and journalists who have been under these attacks, it was very surprising that people believe these false accusations, and not just ordinary users, but also other activists. And this is very sad, and this is very disheartening, but it's like, even if they don't believe it, they don't fully believe it, but they ask questions. For example, after some time, they see these activists and say, is it true that you have got money from this or that organization? So, and then with this question, they convey this message that these accusations are believable. And then they are pushing activists aside, because whenever they raise their voice, that they are target to attacks, and then this credibility of activism not something, is their capital, is what they have to be heard. So this was really for me surprising, and yeah, I can say. All for now.
Thank you very much. So I think we've heard from everyone that the impacts of digital transnational repression are quite severe. So to recap a little bit, social isolation, self-censorship, really impeding transnational advocacy work, serious psychological and social consequences. So the next natural question, I think, is what do we do about it? It is a very diffuse and large problem. You would have a hard time identifying one specific, for example, government agency in Germany who could resolve this. It is cross-cutting. It implicates and involves many different institutions, many different actors. To preface with saying it's a complex problem and there's no easy solutions, but complexity doesn't mean we should do nothing, obviously. So I'd be very curious to hear from Gözde, Arzu, Meryem, what you think might be specific what are the key actors in DTR in sort of the context that you've examined in digital transnational repression? And then what are the key challenges that you think are faced by women? But then also we could just build into the next question, which is, who do you think needs to respond and how should they be responding?
Well, in terms of the key actors, especially for the Turkish case, I think it's really important to know that Turkey has developed very high digital capabilities over the last 15 to 20 years. And we shouldn't forget that compared to Iran and Azerbaijan, who remain outside of the Western axis in international system, Turkey is still very much a partner of the West, right? Although, there has been some friction with Erdogan recently, we know. There is a migration deal still on the table, and Europe especially, and the US to some degree, still depend on Turkey. So Turkey is very much benefiting from these digital capabilities that it's been acquiring from Western governments as well. And in that realm, of course, the Erdogan regime hasn't been sleeping, so they've been establishing lots of new institutions and organizations that deal with big AI, and they're not only using that for research purposes or to, make bureaucratic practices in Turkey easier or something like that. They're also using that to, unleash a group of hackers, AI bots, and all sorts of new digital actors that, we sort of know who they are, but we also don't know, upon activists, journalists, etc. So we have that. And at the same time, Turkey has a big diaspora and has one of the biggest diasporas in the world in Europe. So this makes it particularly difficult for European and democratic host states to respond to the mix of actors that engage in transnational repression and digital transnational repression. So how can states sort of like unravel these linkages and multiple connections between automated actors back home and the one pro-Erdogan supporter network that sits somewhere in Cologne and is part of the hacker networks of the Grey Wolves, right? The Grey Wolves are a right-wing group that is, I don't know, some of you may not know, but they're a right-wing group, and they also have designated hacker groups. So there is a clear connection between online and offline actors, who are, like, some of them sit online back home and offline back home, but we also have online people, actual people who can engage in that repression. And that makes it really hard for governments like Germany or Netherlands or Austria, where, they're big pro-regime strongholds, to react. And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that is emerging. And of course, the second big thing in European politics, identity politics, right? So there's a big tension, I want to say, between how do we react to security challenges from authoritarian states, and on the other hand, how do we deal with naturalized citizens and people who've been born here, like me and my mother. I'm a third-generation German. How do we deal with, no, I'm not supporting Erdogan, but like, how do we deal with people who then become proxies of the regime in a way that is respectful, democratic, and still upholds human rights? And I think during these days, it's really important to build that into the framework of our responses, right? We can't just forego human rights and our democratic values for the sake of security. We know what happens when we do that. So it's really important that the democratic and Western host states design a response that keeps these two pillars in mind and does not ignore the interactive effects between security policy on the one hand, digital security policy and actual security policy, and migration, integration, and identity and citizenship politics on the other.
Thank you, and over to Arzu.
Yeah, so in case of Azerbaijan, when I was trying to answer the question on the key actors, it's actually quite simple, because it really is the state, and then it's state institutions, and then various sort of tools that the state employs or deploys. Of course, it's the state security services, the Ministry of the Interior, who have access to a lot of the information on the target once the target is, of course, picked and decided. The state also then relies quite heavily and extensively to this day on pro-government or mouthpiece media outlets to sort of publicly shame the target in their home countries, to really tarnish their reputation and the work that they do. And of course, deploying a network of trolls and bot accounts that just flood your social media. What they also use and resort to are, of course, some other more sophisticated means. They use these methods thanks to the intrusive surveillance technology that they've purchased over the years, and Azerbaijan is quite well known and is one of the many customers of this type of technology that allows them to hack into accounts, to hijack social media platforms, to send you all sorts of viruses and malware. I mean, Pegasus is, of course, one of the most recent examples, and they also have purchased Kandura before. The list is quite exhaustive and extensive for the kind of technology that the state has and deploys. And then in some cases, like Gözde mentioned, diasporic communities have also been put to practice, as well as the diplomatic missions. And that is a bit of a tricky place, because a lot of these women that I've talked to are so aware of the fact that there could be a potential sort of enemy within the diaspora community that they isolate themselves from socializing, but not in a sense that it has a like psychological impact on them. They just prefer not to socialize with much of the diaspora community because everyone is very different in the diaspora community, and they just prefer to kind of stay within their own social circle of people who share similar values. Now, what are the key challenges? I guess it's all kind of interrelated, right? The challenges and the solutions and whatnot. So the challenges, I think, first of all, a lot of them didn't know how to react and how to behave when all of this was happening. I think, of course, the knee-jerk reaction is to go to the police, but in some of the countries where these women emigrated to, not always had a police force that was actually responsive or taking any measures or providing additional security. In some cases where the women were lucky and they were able to move to countries where the security provisions were better, of course, they talked about having police come to their apartments, check the premises, install security cameras, and then also help them with the social media attacks, finding the person who was behind the attack and actually investigating the cases. So the challenge of like not knowing how to respond. I remember in the very beginning when I was facing digital transnational repression, I was told that, it's part of the job, just kind of leave it, don't really bother thinking about it, but it actually isn't part of the job. It shouldn't be part of the job. And I hope what we're doing here and in the future will not make it part of the job, to be honest with you. So that was a challenge, to have women be aware that this is not what should be happening to them and that there are ways to mitigate what was happening to them. And then, of course, where a lot of this targeting was happening. It's one thing when they get access of your personal email or when they infect your device with a malware, but it's a different kind of challenge when a lot of this targeting happens on social media platforms. And that's when sort of I've heard in multiple cases there was this general sense of, it doesn't make a difference if we reach out to social media platform because there is not a human on the other end of the line actually understanding what I'm going through. I was, I guess, lucky to have been able to help some of them retrieve their accounts if they were hacked, remove content that was blackmail against them on some of the social media platforms just because of the work that I do and the network that I have. But in many of the cases, women don't know. Like a Telegram channel pops up sharing an activist's intimate image. There is nothing they can do because they don't know. They don't know who to reach out to, and some platforms don't respond the way they do. They don't respond equally. Telegram may not respond ever. Maybe Twitter will respond. It really depends. So that was the other challenge. And then the sense of being in a silo, that this was just happening to them and they should just process it and move on. But again, going back to what I said earlier, it shouldn't be this way, right? We should be kind of sharing this experience and creating a pool of knowledge and then developing ways to help mitigate the growing issue of DTR. Yeah.
Thank you, Arzu. And Miriam, who were the key actors in the context that you studied? And are there any challenges you'd like to add?
Yeah, first I want to go back to what Arzu just, last sentence of Arzu, that they think that just they need to process and move on. One activist told me that it feels like you are in a court that never you can leave. Because like there is a false accusation, and then some activists try not to go into any conversation or debate over the accusation. Some activists try to clear everything and explain everything to their best. And then, and usually these kind of attacks have a time like a few days or 1 week, and then they go to after someone else perhaps. So after a week that everything looks calmer, then they think, okay, it's okay, now it's better. But then after some time, or even after some years, if they comment on something that some people, unfortunately not just in Iranian regime, also in the opposition in diaspora, they don't like it. Again, the accusation comes up. It's like, never you explained it, never you left the court. There was not even a court, there was just accusations coming to you. But in terms of actors, I can say that it is different if you are just a female activist and journalist, or you are a female activist and journalist who works on gender issues. Because activists that I interviewed them, when they are just like working on environmental issues or other issues, and they don't have anything to do with feminism, with rights to body, with this kind of things. They are, or for example, LGBTQ activists. When they are not part of these groups or working about discrimination against women, the attacks are different. The attacks when it comes to women who works about women are much harsher. And the actors, of course, the main actor is Iranian regime that engineer and perform the attacks. And these attacks need budget. It's not like you cannot go after an activist and have information about their fathers or the father of father just out of blue. There is budget, there is support, and they come from Iranian regime. But at the same time, it is not just Iranian regime. Whoever in the opposition groups, unfortunately outside Iran, who are kind of systematically working together, they have potential, or they are performing attacks too. And also, when it comes to the women who are active about women issues, there is an army of misogynists, and it is not just some angry men randomly writing a tweet or something. They have really their army. And they have, for example, some Telegram channels, they leave a post there and they say just attack. And they start attacking. But the fact is they don't do their job separately. When it comes to women especially, they unite. Like if it is the regime or the opposition, they unite against activists who is too outspoken for them. So, and then you see that a group which at least claim that they are against the Iranian regime is doing the same as Iranian regime against an activist who is saying something they don't like. But in terms of challenges, I think Arzu said that when we are a target, we don't know what to do. But I think also you don't know what to do when the other activists are target. And the people I interviewed, the women I interviewed, and not just the ones that I interviewed, whoever I have spoken to, whoever, or through my experience, whatever I read or whatever I have listened to, I can say that nobody, absolutely nobody among activists themselves know what to do when another activist is under attack, under digital attack, because of different reasons. One reason is they are afraid to escalate the attack. What if I write something and the attackers say, oh, so you are defending her, you yourself are like this, and of course when you defend her, it means that our attack even is more valid. Or what if we become a target too? We are working in our own islands, and we don't want the attackers arrive in our island too. We don't want them, so we keep silent, but soon and late they will attack on our own island too. But another problem is, again, back to the point that people believe, activists don't know how the accusation against other activists is true. If it is completely wrong, or if some part of it is true, but if I talk against it, I lose my credibility because I am using it for something that is true, the accusation is true, and I'm using it, but then I lose my credibility. So finding ways to not give up on social media is crucial. I have interviewed women that they said we have already seized, we have already give up, like Twitter, especially the X, to Iranian cyber army. It's really hard to be loud on Twitter anymore. It's like it's their place. They're there. They are just changing the topic. They are taking it to another direction, or they attack simply. But another challenge is because it is more than a decade I am working on projects for empowering and capacity building for Iranian civil society. I can say that those organizations that they allocate budgets on projects for Iranian civil society, they are very reluctant to pay anything or to have any plan for activists in diaspora. They are saying no, our target group should be inside Iran. And I don't mean that this priority should entirely change. Just I think that they should a little update their understanding of civil society and its key role players in the digital age, that when you're an activist outside Iran, it doesn't mean that you are useless, and it doesn't mean that you are not challenging for the regime, or you don't need support. And also they should understand that we are all connected, and when one activist here in Berlin is under attack or her accounts are compromised, activists inside Iran are in danger too.
Thank you very much. I think we're running a bit short on time, so I'll ask one last question, but I will challenge you to just give me the shortest answer possible, and maybe we have time for one audience question. But I think sort of the elephant in the room is what do we do now? So I would challenge each of you to mention one intervention that you think would be a useful response to digital transnational oppression, whether from a state or a social media platform or civil society organizations, you choose.
I think I'm going to take the state level because I believe that policy change can only bring about real change. So currently more than half of the world is becoming less democratic. Okay, so these are the current statistics from the VDEM Institute. And given this picture, what do you think should democratic states around the world do? Well, obviously pass legislation that protects our interests, our human rights, our freedom of speech. And transnational repression is a threat to that. And acknowledging that and protecting each one of us is really important. Not only just citizens, but also people who have refugee status, who are in exile, who face the biggest legal burdens when it comes to being protected from their home states, but also from the host states. So the European Union especially has to follow suit to US legislation that has been recently passed, the Transnational Repression Act, I believe, And there are aspirations between G7 countries to sort of bring about policy change. And I think that is the first step that we have to see. And then this will trickle down and also affect how police officers, media houses, etc., deal with the issue of transnational repression, right? So people can come to them and say, hey, I've been attacked by the grey wolves, and the police officer should be then able to say, after receiving specific training on that, being then Turkish rooted citizens being the biggest group in Germany, for instance, to say, okay, I know exactly who these folks are. Let's come on. Let's talk. How can we provide security for you? Media houses should be able to say to a journalist of color or a journalist who has ties to an authoritarian home state to say, hey, come to our HR division. There's legislation on the local level, on our level, and we will protect you. And we will give you mental health support. We will give you digital security training, and we know what to do. I think that's what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Gözde. And we only have, I think, 4 minutes left. So Arzu and Mariam, if you could jump in quickly.
To me, it's acknowledgement and accountability, and that applies to all the actors who are part of this nightmare. Governments, social media platforms, but since Gözde already talked about governments, I would speak to social media platforms. Acknowledging, and to be honest with you, they're perfectly aware of what's going on those platforms, so they're past that stage, but accountability. When are we actually going to see social media platforms account for the extent of harassment that takes place on their platforms, for the lack of response mechanism that understands the country nuances, the cultural nuances, that speak the language and are really not AI generated. I mean, I really don't, like in these kind of situations, when we talk about accountability, throwing in technological solution, it does not satisfy me. I want a human being, I want a group of people who understand the political context, who speak the language, who are able to understand what's happening, understand the seriousness and the gravity of what's happening on these platforms, and then react, and not wait for an investigative journalist or a whistleblower to expose how authoritarian governments or bad state actors deploy or use or abuse the gaps within social media platforms, and then target people who actually are the advocates of change and democracy and human rights.
I think we need information sharing and also community building to be able to support each other, not just from government, also inside within the community. We can support each other. But I think it can happen just every stakeholder does it share to break the silence, to give voice to activists, not to be scared of talking about these attacks, and then the activists at least become aware that there are these attacks, and if they are in Berlin, at least they know other activists in Berlin, Iranian activists, are under the attack, that they get prepared, and also they can do something for each other. I think we need to break the silence.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to end it there because we only have 2 minutes, and that's a very short time for an audience question. But I want to thank my co-panelists, Gözde, Arzu, and Mariam, for the very insightful discussion we've had today. And your research, our research, will hopefully be coming out late this fall. And if you're interested, there will be more to read and more to learn. So thank you very much.
And you can.
And thank you for moderating, Sienna.
Thank you. And if you have questions, you can come find us and we can continue a little Q&A privately.
Thank you very much for this mind-opening panel discussion and for your brave engagement and your brave work. So please give a final warm hand to this panel.